stitching friends. I'm Amy. I'm the Globetrotting Stitcher, and I'm really happy to spend some time with you again today. This is episode 26, and today is July the 1st, so it's a Thursday. Which normally we film our updates on Sundays, so we are several days behind. Which should tell you a little bit about how busy things have been. I know in every video I talk about, oh, it's been so busy lately. And I probably should stop saying that because I think I'm jinxing myself in some way because it just keeps getting busier. The last couple of weeks for me at work have been relentlessly busy. Gary has been very busy. So I'm sure those of you that kind of keep track, we've been a little, our last video that we posted came up quite a bit later than we normally would post. It was kind of out of cycle for us. I've been really behind on responding to comments and emails. So for those of you that take the time to comment, know that I really appreciate it. We really appreciate it. And I'm trying to get back on top of it. But it's been really long days at work, and it looks like it's going to be really long days at work for the next couple of months. So we'll just do the best we can, and thank you for your patience, and thank you for coming to hang out with us despite that. I know that folks are really busy this time of year as well with family stuff and vacations, and I think probably this year more so than normal because at least here in the US, as people are starting to have more freedom to get out and about and see others, I think, we're taking advantage of that because we all missed it so much last year. So anyway, thanks for your patience, and we'll just hang in there and do the best we can. I think the big news for us that's not Stitchy related is that we have had a heat wave here. So if you're in the US and you've been watching the news, you know the Pacific Northwest went through a terrible heat wave this past week. I know other parts of the country have had problems recently as well. But it was really, really bad. For us at any rate. So our normal, just to kind of give you a sense of what it was like, our normal daytime highs here this time of year kind of run between the mid 70s as far as temperature, which those of you that use Celsius, that's usually anywhere between 22 and 24 degrees is kind of typical for us as a high this time of year. And then it cools off in the evenings. Well, our temperatures this last week, we had several days in a row where our high temperature was in the 100s. In fact, Monday here, it was 109 degrees. And again, so for those of you on Celsius, it's somewhere between 42 and 44 degrees. It's really hot. And because we don't normally have really hot temperatures this time, well, we don't normally have really hot temperatures at all here. It's pretty mild. Most people just don't have air conditioning, certainly not central air. So we just had to suffer through it. It was pretty awful. We finally got to the point where to keep Bear and Sophie from overheating and keep them fairly comfortable, we were taking hand towels and getting them wet and then putting them in the refrigerator to chill and then switching them out every 40 minutes when they were cold enough and just kind of laying the towels on their backs and their bellies. And normally they don't like having stuff on them, but they actually, they would wear them around the house and kind of just lay there and let the cool soak in. And I think that really helped them. They certainly seemed to enjoy it. So we're thankful to be back more in our normal range. It looks like the next week or so, we're going to get up a little higher than is typical, but nothing like what we had. So hopefully we've seen the worst of it for this summer and we've made it through, but it's been really hot and really miserable. So anyway, that's what's kind of been happening here. So let's get into the stitching. I am really excited to share the first thing with you because I had a finish. So those of you that have been hanging out with us a lot lately, you know that I have been working on Feast of Friendship by Blackbird Designs, and that's been the piece I've been working on in the sampler part of my rotation. I was stitching this on 35 count tin roof linen by Weeks Dye Works. And with the exception of a couple of DMCs that I had to sub in for some of the overdyes, I've been stitching with all the called for flosses. So the last time you saw this, I was kind of hoping for a finish, but I thought that might be a little bit ambitious. I had finished somewhere between 1/2 and 2/3 of the big blue house. And I had stitched in all of the borders. I had stitched in the bottom banner and the big pumpkin and the fruit bowl, but I had quite a ways to go on the house and quite a ways to go as far as filling in all the fruits in the fruit bowl. But I'm happy to say that when it came out this last time, I was able to get a finish. So this is how it looks all done. I could not be more delighted with this. I'm so happy with the fabric that I went with for this. I think it just really makes these colors pop, the oranges and the blues. Gary and I were both talking about how much we just love the blue house, and how it's such a unique way of designing to have 3 different colors of floss used for a single building. So you've got your dark blue, your kind of medium blue, and then you've got a gray. And it just gives it this sort of weathered look. And I also really love the effect that the over-dyed floss gives, because you kind of get that sense of the siding of the house and kind of a weathered feel to it. I also love this gorgeous effect that they did in the roof, where it looks like you've got shingles, and some of them are lighter and some of them are darker. This is just really, truly lovely, and I think I'm going to treasure it for many years to come. So I do need to pick out a, sorry, when I see it from this angle, I find all of the dog hairs that I don't see when I look at it straight on. But anyway, I do need to go and pick out a nice frame for this. I've decided I am going to frame it myself. I'm going to go and pick out a custom frame, I think, just given the size. I think it'll be hard to find a standard size frame that will look right with this. But I'm going to go pick out a custom frame and have that sent over, and then get this framed up so that it's all ready to display for our autumn decor. But yeah, this is Feast of Friendship, Blackbird Designs. This has been a real joy to stitch. And if it's something that is in your stash and you haven't started it yet, I would encourage you to stitch it. It's a lovely, lovely piece. So there we go. Okay, the next whip that we have to show you, I'm going to show you my full coverage, which is Rose Trellis In by Heaven and Earth Designs. I am stitching it on a 28 count white Lugana using a 2/1 using a combination of half stitch and continental tent stitch. So the last time you saw this, I was pretty well finished with stitching the various elements of the house, and I had made it all the way across the top of the second row of pages, but I still had a really large chunk of that last page to get done. There's actually 2 pages there, page 6, not page 6, excuse me, page 12. I needed to finish page 11 and page 12, and page 12 is actually just a really small, it's like 10 or 12 stitches wide, so it's not a full page. But I had a big chunk to finish, and I was secretly hoping I could get that whole section done and be ready to move on to the next row of pages. But I kind of knew that wasn't realistic. And I did not get that done, but I am really pleased with what I did get accomplished. So this is where it is right now. So as you can see, I have just this little section here to get done. So I did all of this in here and up into here, stitched in this gray background and blue background with these tree branches. Now the funny thing is with the week that I worked on this was an exceptionally busy week. And the weekend part of it was Father's Day weekend. So I went and spent time with my dad. We had a barbecue that we went to with some friends. And so we were out and about a lot more than we probably normally would be on a normal weekend. So I lost a lot of the hours that I would normally have put in. And I think if it had been a typical weekend rather than a holiday weekend, I would have actually gotten all the way through this row of pages. Somebody had said, left a comment fairly recently saying, it seems like you're stitching, is it just me or are you making a lot of progress on that? And no, it's not just you. I've been making a lot more progress on this the last few times I've stitched on it. This whole house is, the confetti is just really, really heavy. It's very heavy confetti. And then when you get into the background, that confetti lightens up quite tremendously. And so I'm just able to stitch a lot faster when I get out of that. But I am so much enjoying, well, the truth is I don't really enjoy stitching on this per se, but I love the way it's coming out. I love how the picture is emerging, and I find it I find it worth all of the effort that goes into it. It's a really, really beautiful piece, and there's just something so exciting about seeing this picture come together slowly over time. That's really, really satisfying. So this is where I am now, and I'm very much looking forward to the next time I work on this, because I'm highly confident that a couple of days will finish this up, and then I will get started on this whole next row, which is where a lot of the really interesting elements of this design start to show up. So that's where I am on that. The next whip we have to show you is Gary's. And let me just put this aside here. Gary has been working on To Market by Hannah's Needlecraft. He is stitching this on a 16 count beautiful beige Aida. And the last time you saw this, he had finished stitching the first little boy who's at the head of the line of people that are taking all of their produce and animals to the market. And this little boy, he's got a basket of maize on his head, and he's leading the pack. And then, so Gary had finished stitching him and done all the back stitching on him, and then had started stitching the woman who's walking behind him. As I said, we've been busy. So Gary actually hasn't really worked on this a whole lot since the last time you saw it. Although he has picked it up in the last few days and started plugging away on it again. So Gary, this is where it is now.
Yep. I just haven't worked on it, but I did work on it over the past 2 days, and that's only like half of her dress, and there's multicolors in there, and the next part of her dress is, I think, either 2 or 3 different colors from what's already there. So this is a pretty, I don't know so much that it's time consuming, but you gotta want to do it. I guess I don't really mean that. I guess what I mean is that I'm enjoying doing this. I just didn't have what I needed to work on it, but still, I think if I hadn't worked on it the last couple of days, then I wouldn't have a desire now to at least finish that lady, because those colors are really neat, and the next colors that are going to go on are green and brown, which is completely different from all of the colors that are there now. So now I'm just curious about completing that and seeing where that goes. But it's a fun thing to work on. Amy mentioned that maybe I should do my backstitch after I finish the whole section or piece, if you will, of the whole thing. And I'd rather just do it. When I cross stitch, I have these big magnifying glasses in front of me. There's nothing I can't see. So, but she did make a good point that if you do that, it would make it more difficult to see when you have to put your other stitches in. But again, if you're almost blind like I am, and you use those multiple mega things, it's not a problem.
Yeah. And I am also a back stitch as I go person, but I was telling Gary that, I think he's back stitched this line here, and I was telling him when I back stitch, I wait until I have got, that filled in and then do the back stitch. But again, at the end of the day, everybody gets to stitch the way that works for them, and he's found a way to stitch that works for him. And I think as long as he's enjoying it and he's happy with his results, that's the only thing that matters. We don't allow the cross-stitch police here.
Just the commenters.
Just the commenters. One funny thing happened with this. One other thing I wanted to mention before I told that story. So we had mentioned the last time that Gary was getting ready to do his first specialty stitches. So these blocks of orange color down here in the skirt are, what are they? They're eyelet stitches. And we had, so he got to do his first eyelet stitches. Do you have any, how did you enjoy those? Did you?
Well, I guess she told me that you're supposed to do them from the center, like go out from the center on each one. And I think I did that on the first one. And then in the second one, I found myself going out from the edges, and I was like, oh, I can't do this on the next one. So in the next one, I found myself going out from the edges, and I was like, well, this really isn't what you're supposed to do. So I kind of forced myself to figure out how to do it on the last 2 or last 3 of those where I'm coming from the center. And if you look at it closely, I don't know if I can get a picture that will give it good enough. You can see the difference. It looks better if you do it from the center. It looks more like a burst sort of thing. But whatever, you know.
It looks great. So we have a funny little incident here last night because Gary and I were both stitching together on our respective couches, and I was plugging away, and I had a couple of parked threads that I needed to work in the section that I was working on. And once I finished those, I needed to get a new piece of floss off of a bobbin. And usually when I stitch, I just work from my master DMC box. I don't unless I'm working with specialty threads, I don't kit up a project with DMC. It's there, I pull it out of the box, I put it back in the box, and then the next project I work in, I pull my flosses out of the same box. And so usually, I've got my box of DMC and I just keep it on the floor at my feet, and I reach down and I pull out whatever I need whenever I need it. So I was at the point where I needed a new strand, and I reached down from my box and it wasn't there. And so then I checked the other side and it wasn't there, and I was like, well, where's my floss box? Where's my DMC? And Gary's like, oh, I have that over here. And I told him, I said, if I had known that teaching you to cross stitch would mean that I'd have to compete for the floss box, I might have given it a second thought. So ladies, those of you who are out there that are, so a lot of you have commented about how you wish you could get your husbands to cross stitch. Let this be a warning to you. All right. The last whip that we have to show you is my travel stitching, and that is Seasons Autumn by Leela's Studio. I am stitching this on a 32 count pecan Wexford linen by Silk Weaver. And the last time you saw this, I was telling you I hadn't been making a whole lot of progress on it. I had finished the first of the birds. I had started to put in berries and leaves. I had stitched part of one of the pumpkins, and I was starting to stitch in the cauldron, but I really didn't have a lot done. This time around, I am so happy with how much I accomplished. I feel like I've made really great progress. So let me show you where I am with this. So as you can see, I am closing in on a finish. Since you've seen this, I have finished more of the acorns and leaves over here. I've finished the rest of the berries. I've stitched in all of the branches over here. Started working on the second bird. I stitched the cauldron, the word autumn, and I'm about maybe 1/2 to 2/3 of the way finished stitching in this border. Also finished the leaves and the pumpkin over here. So what I have left to do, I just got to finish this border. There's a nice big fat pumpkin here. I have a couple leaves to stitch in, and then the bird and a quilt star, and it's done. So this one is really coming along. I have really been enjoying working on it. And the farther I go, the happier I am that I decided to change out the color of those birds and make them blue instead of stitching them in the black that is called for. I think that would have I think for a stitcher who's into Halloween stitching, it would kind of evoke that sort of a feel to it, which is absolutely fine. But I think it would have made it a little bit more of a heavy look, and I like the blue. I think it's kind of a lighter look. So I am really loving this. All of the designs in this series so far, this is the second one I've stitched, and they're just I find them really enjoyable to work on. They are a lot of fun. And I got actually a question recently from our friend, I think it was Diane, who's from Australia. Hi, Diane. And she had asked if I was planning to stitch all of the charts in this series, and I am. I'm definitely stitching all 4 of them. When I finish this one, I have something else I'm going to bring in for travel stitching, because there's a chart that I want to get done in time before Christmas this year. So I'm going to do that one next. So you should be hopefully seeing a start on that fairly soon. And then I'll go back and finish the rest in this series. But absolutely, these are great. Okay, so that's it for our whips. I wanted to take a minute and answer a few questions. And these, apparently a lot of folks are thinking about stitching on the diagonal and stitching on full coverage, because I've had a lot of questions regarding those two things. And so these questions, that the answers are going to kind of all overlap a bit. I'll try to be concise and I'll try to explain clearly, but might be challenging. So the first question came from Cindy Gaudet, or Gaudet. I apologize if I mispronounced that, Cindy. And she said, I've been stitching for years, but don't know the difference between half and tent stitch. Also, how or who did you watch to figure out diagonal stitching? So what I will say, Cindy, is, and I might be wrong, I am not an expert. My understanding is that half stitch and tent stitch are essentially the same thing. I believe that half stitch is how cross stitchers refer to it, and tent stitching is how embroiderers refer to it. I think we're just using the same name for a different stitch, or a different name for the same stitch, excuse me. Having said that, continental tent stitch is different than a tent stitch. So to try and explain this, I've drawn a diagram that hopefully is not confusing. And I'll use this again here in a minute to answer a different question. So when I'm doing a half stitch, this row 1 that I've got here, when I'm doing a half stitch, I come up in the bottom, sorry, get the brain in order here. So I should first of all say, when I'm doing full cross, I use the Danish method unless I'm working with an overdyed, in which case I'll use the English method and I'll stitch full crosses one at a time. The Danish method, you stitch all your half stitches across, and then you come back across for the top half of your stitches. So when you're doing the half stitch or the regular tent stitch, for me, I come up in the bottom left, go down in the top right, come up in the bottom left, down in the top right, all the way across. And that's how I do my half stitch or a tent stitch. The continental tent stitch, you start on the right hand side, or you could start on, you start on the right hand side, you still come up bottom left, go down top right, but you go backwards, come up bottom left, come up top right. So the thread pulls differently on the back. It uses more floss that way, but particularly if you're doing, if you're alternating between a half stitch and then this continental tent stitch, what it does is it pulls the tension and it pulls your fabric in two different directions. So you get, you're more likely to have an even fabric and not get warping. So that is the continental tent stitch. You just start at a different place and then your thread goes in a different direction along the back. I hope that makes sense. I think that probably seems really confusing. We've had a lot of questions around this, and we keep talking about it's on our to-do list to make sort of a tutorial video to help explain it. It's just not something we've had time to do, but so that's a someday, maybe sometime this summer if I can take some time during a vacation. So the next part of the question, how or who did you watch to figure out diagonal? So there's 3 longtime floss tubers that I used when I was kind of figuring out diagonal stitching. And the first of them is Blitzstitch. His channel name is Blitzstitch. His name is Brian. And Brian is actually the person who came up with the idea of diagonal stitching in the first place. And everybody else that is doing it kind of either learned it from him or learned it from somebody who learned it from him. And so I would recommend going to his channel. He posts an update video about once a month. If you're not watching him, I highly recommend him. He stitches a lot of big, beautiful designs. He's got a great selection of whips, and I just really enjoy seeing the things that he's working on. He's a very meticulous, neat stitcher, and his designs are always so pretty. But he is the one who kind of came up with the idea. If you look back over the last several years, he's done a couple of videos, especially in his early floss tubing days, where he explains his diagonal stitching. And I think, you'll learn a lot from checking out his videos. I also recommend another longtime floss tuber, Karen. Her channel name is The Needlebug. And she's got a couple of really great tutorials that she has filmed on the differences between half stitch, continental tent stitch, and some other stitches that you can use. and it's really clear, really easy to understand. I have found her tutorials and explanations on those really helpful, and she's got a lot of really great recommendations. So I would look through her history of videos as well. And then the third person that I found helpful when I was figuring out diagonal stitching is Sarah. Her channel name is Stitchin' Mommy. She's another one who's been filling floss tubes forever. She's got the most amazing collection of whips. She is working on so many different things, and so many beautiful things. And she does a lot of full coverage and mirabilias. So if you're not watching Stitchin' Mommy, she's another one whose channel I really enjoy. And so she has kind of moved away from diagonal stitching and parking as well. She just doesn't enjoy stitching that way. So she's gone back to more cross country or extreme cross country. But if you look in some of her older videos, I think she's got one piece where she's still working on something using that style. But if you look at some of her older videos, she explains how she approaches it as well. The one thing I will say is that all of those individuals have a slightly different approach to diagonal stitching than I do. So Brian stitches from the bottom up. I stitch from the top down. Sarah on hers was stitching from right to left, and I stitch from left to right. So I kind of had to take some of the principles that they talked about and then figure out how I would make it work for me. But they are a great resource and great. They have some great stuff to learn from. I've also heard, I have not watched her videos myself, but I've heard that Teresa Little Stitcher is another really great resource for folks that are wanting to learn about parking and working full coverage and some of these ways of stitching. So hopefully that is helpful. Okay, so next question comes from Shelley Kane. And Shelley said, could you please speak more about your stitching on Rose Trellis Inn? What are the half stitch and continental tent stitch? We covered that. Kind of. And what is the difference between them? On what count fabric do these stitches look best? I assume you wouldn't want to do it on a higher count fabric since you are stitching 2/1. So that's a really great question, Shelley. What I would say is if you're going to stitch 2/1, I would not suggest going any higher than 28 count, because even on 28 count, especially when you get into heavy confetti, it gets really bulky really quickly. If you're a stitcher who enjoys stitching with just one strand of floss, I think you can get away with going to a higher count of fabric and doing 1/1. If you have the eyes to see it. Sarah, the Stitchin' Mommy, who I mentioned earlier, she stitches some of her full coverage on like 40 count 1/1, which I do not know how she does it. My eyes would be like, but if you have the ability to see that small, you can certainly do 1/1. But if you want to do 2/1, I wouldn't go higher than 28 count. I think it will just get really, really bulky unless you truly have everything is just big blocks of a single color and you don't have a lot of confetti. So hopefully that's helpful. The next question came from Joanne Moore, and Joanne said, would it be possible to address the mechanics of stitching on the diagonal? I believe you spoke of it in a past video. I have collected a few mirabilias and would like to do them justice in the stitching. So I will try to answer this as clearly as possible. I think what's challenging is that when I stitch on the diagonal, I do it differently when I'm stitching a mirabilia than I do when I'm stitching on my full coverage. And the reason for that is when I'm stitching a mirabilia, I'm stitching usually 2/2. I'm not stitching over 1. So I'm using full crosses on my mirabilias, and I'm stitching using the Dutch method. So to kind of show you how I approach stitching on the diagonal for a mirabilia or something where I'm doing full cross, essentially stitching on the diagonal is just the same as stitching in columns, except you're using different lines to guide you on where you're working at any given time. So as you can see when I pull up this section of chart, it's just a standard section of chart, but what I've done is taken a ruler and I've marked off even diagonals for the next couple sections that I'm going to want to stitch. And then all I do is I just pay attention to those as my boundaries. And other than that, I just treat it as though I were stitching in a column. And I do the Dutch method where I do, in one row, I do all of the stitches all the way across and then work my way back. Next row, all of my stitches all the way across, work my way back, and so on. And I just stitch down the diagonal. I wouldn't say that's necessarily the correct way to do it. You can certainly stitch in columns if you want. You can stitch in, you can do cross country, or you can stitch color sections, especially with something like a mirabilia or a lavender and lace where you don't have a lot of confetti, but you have chunks of color. A lot of times it might make more sense to you to stitch cross country or stitch those chunks of color. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So don't think that stitching in the diagonal is a correct way to stitch. It's just a different way. And for me, I find it really satisfying. It helps me make sure I don't miss any stitches. But that's hopefully kind of a clear way to explain how I approach stitching on the diagonal with a mirabilia. It's just like the Dutch method. I just have set boundaries for what sections I'll stitch. When it comes to stitching on the diagonal for a full coverage, I'm going to pull this back up because I do that combination of half stitch and continental tent stitch so that I get a more even tension. So to kind of explain how that would work, in row 1, now that I'm thinking about this, well, regardless, in row 1, basically what you would do is you start at the top of your diagonal and you would work your way across just like you would, so bottom left, top right, straight down, bottom left, top right, from working your way from left to right. Then you would switch to continental tent stitch when you get to row 2, and you wouldn't start all the way back over on the far left. You would start your first stitch at the far end of the right side. So you come up in the bottom left of the square, you go down in the top right. And then you pull your thread back toward the left, come up in the bottom left, go down in the top right, and work your way back across this way. Then when you get to row 3, you start on the left-hand side, work your way back across. You get to row 4, you start on the right-hand side and work your way across. And what that ends up doing, because each row, your thread is moving in a different direction as far as how it pulls across the back of the piece, it creates a more even tension so your piece is less likely to warp. I hope that is clear. I think it would be clearer if we were able to do a tutorial and you could see it. I know that this is probably confusing and maybe not terribly helpful, but it was the best I could kind of come up with for a video like this where we're doing an update. So if you have questions, please let us know. But that's kind of the mechanics of how I approach diagonal stitching. And I do it differently for mirabilias or for full coverage because I'm doing different kinds of stitches in both instances. So I think we're about ready to wrap up for today. That kind of covers it if we're not all completely confused about what I've talked about. So let's just tell you what I'm going to be working on or what we're going to be working on between now and the next time we film. I am going to spend a week working on my Fancy Lady. That's Royal Holiday by Mirabilia. Then I'm going to spend a week working on my seasonal design, which is Will You Be My Valentine? That was a new start the last time we showed it to you. And I am actually going to hope I can push for a finish. It's not a very big design, and so I think that if I can put in a reasonable amount of time, I might be able to get that one done. So hopefully you'll see a finish on that the next time we update you. I am also going to continue to work on my travel stitching, which is the Seasons Autumn by Leela's Studio. And again, fingers crossed, I'd like to get that one finished between now and the next time we update you. It just kind of depends on how busy things are and how much travel stitching time I get. So we'll see, but I'm hoping. And then Gary is going to continue to work on his To Market by Hannah's Needlecraft. I'm not sure if he's got kind of a goal in mind that he wants to complete, but I think Gary's approach is less about kind of setting a specific goal and more about just enjoying it as he goes. So we'll see. So yeah, I think that's it for us. We have really enjoyed spending time with you today. If you like our videos, we hope that you will give us a thumbs up and subscribe so that you can always, so you never miss a video. If you hit the little bell in the corner, you'll get a notification from YouTube when we post a new update. And of course, we are always happy to get your comments and your questions either through email at globetrottingstitcher@gmail.com or just directly commenting on the video. We really do enjoy hearing from you. And also, I do try to keep regular updates on Instagram between videos. I'm Globetrotting Stitcher on Instagram as well. So I think that's it for us this time. Take care, be safe. We hope that you are enjoying summer if you're here in the Northern Hemisphere, and that those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, we hope that your winter is mild and pleasant for you. So we will see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.